At exactly 8:30 Monday morning, the entire staff gathered in the showroom of Sterling Automotive Group. Nearly 200 employees stood in silence. On the stage stood the company's CEO, Olivia Harrington. Confident, powerful, known for making ruthless business decisions. Beside the stage stood Daniel Brooks, a 38-year-old single father. For 12 years, Daniel had worked as a purchasing manager. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But everyone knew one thing. If something needed fixing, Daniel always found a solution. Unfortunately, the company had just posted its biggest quarterly loss in 5 years. Someone had to take the blame. Olivia stepped to the microphone. As of today, we are restructuring. Several employees looked nervous. Then Olivia spoke a name. Daniel Brooks. Daniel calmly walked forward. She looked directly into his eyes. Your position has been eliminated. The room became completely silent. Daniel nodded politely. I understand. Olivia wasn't finished. In business, people who can't create results become liabilities. She handed him a termination envelope. Then, in front of everyone, she added, You're finished. Some employees lowered their heads. Others avoided eye contact. Daniel simply accepted the envelope. No argument. No anger. No excuses. Before leaving, he thanked every coworker who had supported him over the years. Outside the building, he sat quietly inside his old pickup truck. His phone rang. It was his 12-year-old daughter, Emma. Dad, are you coming to my school play tonight? Daniel smiled. I wouldn't miss it for anything. He never told her he'd just lost his job. That evening, after the school play, Daniel stopped by a small roadside diner. An elderly man sat alone, reading the local newspaper. As Daniel reached for the paper after the man left, one article caught his attention. City auction this Saturday. Abandoned Riverside Machine Factory starting bid, $50,000. The article said the factory had been empty for almost 15 years. Most people called it junk. Developers weren't interested. Banks refused to finance it. Daniel stared at the photograph. Something didn't feel right. The location. The railroad access. The large warehouse space. The heavy electrical infrastructure. He whispered to himself. They're looking at what it is. I'm looking at what it could become. 3 days later. Daniel withdrew nearly every dollar from his savings account. Money he'd spent years putting aside for emergencies. Friends tried to stop him. His former coworkers called him crazy. Even the bank manager asked, Are you sure about this? Daniel smiled. No. But I believe opportunities usually look worthless before they become valuable. On Saturday morning, he walked into the city auction. What happened next would change his life forever. Saturday morning arrived. The city auction hall was crowded. Real estate investors. Warehouse owners. Developers. Construction companies. Everyone had gathered for one reason. Cheap land. Daniel quietly took a seat in the back row. He noticed something strange. No one seemed interested in the abandoned Riverside Machine Factory. Instead, everyone was bidding aggressively on downtown properties. An older auctioneer finally announced. Lot number 27. Riverside Machine Factory. A faded photograph appeared on the large screen. Broken windows. Rusted gates. Collapsed roofs. The room chuckled. One investor whispered. That place should be demolished. Another laughed. It's worth more as scrap metal. The bidding began. Starting at $50,000. Silence. No one raised a paddle. The auctioneer looked around. Any bids? Daniel slowly lifted his paddle. $50,000. The room turned to look at him. One businessman smirked. He's buying a money pit. The auctioneer waited. Any higher bids? A developer casually offered. $52,000. Daniel didn't hesitate. $55,000. The developer shrugged and lowered his paddle. It isn't worth the headache. The room fell silent again. Going once. Going twice. Sold. The gavel struck the desk. Daniel Brooks had just purchased the most unwanted property in the city. 2 days later, Daniel visited the factory for the first time. The massive steel gates groaned open. Dust filled the air. Broken machines were scattered across the floor. The building looked abandoned.
Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Enjoy the video.
Yet something caught Daniel's attention. The foundations were solid. The heavy-duty electrical system was still intact. The railway tracks behind the factory were connected to the city's main freight line. He smiled. This place isn't worthless. It was simply forgotten. While exploring the back warehouse, Daniel discovered a locked storage room. The padlock was badly rusted. After a few minutes, he managed to force it open. Inside were dozens of old filing cabinets covered in dust. Most contained useless paperwork. But one cabinet was different. Inside was a thick blue folder labeled Confidential, Expansion Project. Daniel opened it. His eyes widened. The documents revealed that the city had already approved a new highway interchange less than 1 mile from the factory. Construction would begin within 6 months. Once completed, the abandoned factory would become one of the best-connected industrial properties in the entire region. Daniel couldn't believe it. No one at the auction had mentioned it. The information had been buried in old planning documents. He smiled quietly. They weren't buying the future. They were buying the past. Just then, his phone rang. The caller ID made his smile disappear. It was Olivia Harrington, the CEO who had fired him. She had just learned what Daniel had purchased. And she wanted to make him an offer. Daniel looked at the phone for a moment before answering. Hello. A calm, familiar voice came through. Daniel, it's Olivia Harrington. I heard you bought the Riverside factory. Daniel smiled slightly. News travels fast. Olivia got straight to the point. I'd like to buy it. Daniel looked around the empty warehouse. The auction was 2 days ago. You could have bought it then. There was a brief silence. We didn't think it had any value. Daniel replied calmly. I did. Olivia took a deep breath. I'll pay you $100,000. Daniel looked out the broken window. That's generous. But no. The call ended. The next morning, a black luxury SUV stopped outside the factory. Olivia stepped out with 2 senior executives. She walked through the dusty building. This place is falling apart. Daniel smiled. Today, yes. What about tomorrow? Olivia frowned. I'll offer you $500,000. One executive whispered. That's 10 times what he paid. Daniel slowly closed the old blueprint he was reading. I'm not selling. Olivia crossed her arms. You've lost your job. You have a daughter to raise. You can't rebuild a factory this size. Daniel replied confidently. Maybe. But I don't need to rebuild all of it. The executives looked confused. Daniel pointed toward the back of the property. I only need Warehouse 3. They followed him. Unlike the rest of the factory, Warehouse 3 was almost untouched. The roof was solid. The electrical system still worked. Heavy-duty loading docks were intact. Most importantly, it sat directly beside the active railway line. Olivia looked surprised. You knew this before you bought it? Daniel nodded. I did my homework. He unfolded another blueprint. This warehouse was designed for heavy manufacturing. It already has everything small businesses need. One executive suddenly understood. You're planning to rent it out. Daniel smiled. Not rent. Share. The room fell silent. Daniel explained his vision. Instead of leasing the entire building to one company, he would convert Warehouse 3 into affordable workspaces for local mechanics, fabricators, welders, and small manufacturers who couldn't afford expensive industrial property. Each business would have its own unit. They would share equipment, loading docks, and utilities. Operating costs would stay low. Everyone would benefit. Olivia stared at him. That's actually brilliant. Daniel shrugged. Sometimes the biggest opportunity isn't serving the biggest company. It's helping hundreds of small ones. Just then, a construction vehicle pulled up outside. A city engineer stepped out carrying official documents. He looked around until he found Daniel. Mr. Brooks? Yes. I have some good news. The city council has officially approved the new highway interchange. Construction begins next month. The executives looked at each other in shock. Property values around the factory were about to skyrocket. Olivia realized something. Daniel hadn't bought a worthless factory. He had bought the future. But someone else had realized it too. Across the street, a black SUV sat parked. Inside, a billionaire developer watched the factory through binoculars. And he had already decided. He would get that property at any cost. The black SUV remained parked across the street. Inside sat Adrian Cole. A billionaire real estate developer known for buying forgotten industrial land before anyone else recognized its value. He lowered his binoculars and smiled. So, someone beat me to it. His assistant looked surprised. Should we make him an offer? Adrian shook his head. First, find out who he is. Meanwhile, Daniel had already begun cleaning Warehouse 3. Friends from the neighborhood volunteered to help. Local welders. Mechanics. Electricians. Even former co-workers who had once doubted him showed up with tools. His daughter Emma painted a wooden sign that read, Brooks Industrial Hub. One by one, small business owners visited the property. A furniture maker. A motorcycle builder. A metal fabricator. A custom parts manufacturer. Within 2 weeks, every available workspace had been reserved. For the first time in 15 years, the old factory was alive again. That afternoon, a convoy of luxury vehicles entered the property. Adrian Cole stepped out wearing an expensive navy suit. He smiled confidently. You must be Daniel Brooks. Daniel nodded. I am. Adrian looked around the busy warehouse. I have to admit, you've done impressive work. He handed Daniel a briefcase. Inside was a purchase agreement. The offer read, $8 million. Several workers gasped. Emma looked at her father. Daniel calmly closed the briefcase. I'm not selling. Adrian laughed. Everyone has a price. Daniel smiled. Not everything is for sale. The billionaire's smile slowly faded. You realize you could retire today. Daniel looked at the workers repairing machines and setting up their businesses. If I sell, over 50 families lose the opportunity they were just given. I won't do that. For the first time in years, someone had told Adrian Cole no. As Adrian walked back toward his SUV, his assistant whispered, What now? Adrian looked back at the factory. If we can't buy it, We'll build something bigger. Within days, construction began on a massive industrial park just 5 miles away. The news spread quickly. Everyone assumed Daniel's small project would fail against a billionaire's resources. Some tenants became nervous. A few even considered leaving. One evening, Emma noticed her father sitting alone inside the warehouse. Worried? Daniel smiled. A little. She handed him a drawing she had made. It showed dozens of small businesses standing together beneath one roof. At the top she had written, "Big dreams start in small places." Daniel smiled. At that moment, he knew exactly how to compete. Not with more money, but with something Adrian Cole could never buy. A community. The next morning, Daniel announced a bold new plan that would either save the factory or cost him everything. The next morning, dozens of local business owners gathered inside the old factory. Daniel stood on a wooden platform with Emma beside him. He took a deep breath. "I have an announcement." The room became quiet. "We can't compete with Adrian Cole's money." Several people lowered their heads. "But we can compete with something he doesn't have." He smiled. "Each of you helped rebuild this place. This factory belongs to all of us." The workers looked at each other. Daniel continued. "I'm creating a partnership program. Instead of simply renting space, every business here will become a partner. If the factory grows, everyone grows." The room erupted into applause. For the first time, the tenants didn't feel like renters. They felt like owners. Across town, Adrian Cole watched the news on his office television. The reporter smiled. "Brooks Industrial Hub has announced an innovative partnership model supporting local entrepreneurs." Adrian turned off the TV. His expression hardened. He just made it impossible for tenants to leave. His assistant nodded. "What do we do now?" Adrian thought for a moment. Then smiled. "If they won't leave willingly, we'll take away their biggest customer." A week later, one of the factory's largest clients canceled a $1 million contract without explanation. Then another customer canceled. And another. Within 3 days, nearly half the orders were gone. Panic spread through the workshops. One business owner approached Daniel. "If this continues, we'll have to close." Daniel remained calm. "There has to be a reason." That evening, Emma entered Daniel's office carrying her laptop. "Dad, I found something." She turned the screen toward him. Every company that had canceled their contracts had signed new agreements with Cole Industries. Daniel smiled. So that's his plan. Instead of competing fairly, Adrian was trying to starve the small businesses until they were forced to leave. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency meeting. "We're not going to fight with lower prices," one mechanic asked. "Then how do we survive?" Daniel looked around the room. "By working together." He proposed something no one expected. The metal shop would manufacture parts for the machine shop. The machine shop would support the furniture makers. The logistics company would deliver products for everyone. Instead of operating as separate businesses, they would become one connected network. Within weeks, costs dropped dramatically. Production became faster. New customers arrived because they could now purchase multiple services from one location. Soon, Brooks Industrial Hub became known as the city's most efficient small business community. News channels began covering the remarkable turnaround. One headline caught Adrian's attention. "The factory nobody wanted is becoming the city's fastest-growing business hub." Adrian stared at the screen in disbelief. The plan that was supposed to destroy Daniel had made him even stronger. Just then, Adrian's lawyer rushed into the office with shocking news. "Sir, the city council has made a decision." Adrian frowned. "What decision?" The government wants to partner with Brooks Industrial Hub on a major manufacturing project. The contract was worth over $200 million. And if Daniel won it, everything would change forever. The conference room at City Hall was filled with business leaders, investors, and reporters. Daniel Brooks stood quietly beside the mayor. Across the room stood Adrian Cole. The billionaire looked confident. For years, he had won every major industrial contract he pursued. The mayor stepped to the podium. Today, we will announce the company selected to lead the city's new advanced manufacturing partnership. The room fell silent. One contract. Worth over $200 million. Thousands of future jobs. The mayor opened the envelope. The winning proposal is. He paused. Brooks Industrial Hub. The room erupted into applause. Daniel closed his eyes for a brief moment. 6 months earlier, he had been fired in front of hundreds of co-workers. Now he was leading one of the biggest business projects in the city's history. Adrian couldn't believe it. He walked over to Daniel. I offered you millions. You refused. Daniel smiled. I wasn't building a fortune. I was building a future. Over the next year, the abandoned Riverside factory was transformed. Broken windows were replaced. Modern equipment filled the workshops. Solar panels covered the rooftops. New rail connections brought freight trains directly into the facility. More than 300 small businesses operated under one roof. Over 2,000 people found stable jobs. The place everyone once called worthless became the city's fastest-growing industrial center. Meanwhile, Sterling Automotive Group faced serious challenges. After firing experienced employees during the restructuring, projects were delayed and costs increased. Several major clients chose Brooks Industrial Hub instead. At a shareholders' meeting, Olivia Harrington addressed the board. I made one mistake. I judged a person's value by their job title instead of their vision. A few weeks later, Olivia visited Daniel's office. This time, there was no stage. No audience. No microphones. Just two people sitting across a table. She placed an envelope in front of him. I owe you an apology. Daniel smiled. You don't owe me anything. I learned something because of what happened. Olivia looked surprised. What did you learn? Daniel glanced through the office window. Workers were laughing as they unloaded materials from a train. Emma was helping organize a community event for local families. He smiled. If I hadn't been fired, I never would have discovered this place. Olivia nodded. Would you ever come back to Sterling? Daniel gently pushed the envelope back across the table. I already have my dream job. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't the richest businessman in the city. But every morning, he woke up knowing hundreds of families depended on a place he had built from almost nothing. 1 year later, the city officially renamed the property the Brooks Innovation District. At the entrance stood a bronze plaque engraved with a simple message. Opportunities don't always look valuable at first. Sometimes the greatest success begins where everyone else stops looking. Emma smiled as she read it. Dad. They said you were finished. Daniel looked across the thriving factory. Thousands of people were working. Dozens of new businesses were opening. The sound of machines echoed through the buildings that had once stood empty. He smiled. They were wrong. Sometimes, losing your job isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your empire.